need to concentrate on to defend this space. Let me try and share the screen. This is the place where I always, okay, there it is. Share. Can you people see this? Can someone help me? Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, so I take it. Yeah, so I've
Perfect.
got that all correct.
Perfect.
ICT, IIC, ESL, Think Tank, Mumbai. What have you? There you are. Cyber warfare versus cyber crimes. You know, some part of this is not visible to me. Hopefully, it's visible to you. I hope you can see the whole screen and you're not, you know, can you
Yes,
see
sir,
the whole?
it's visible.
Okay,
Yes.
great.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect.
So let me try and see so that I can also see the whole screen. Somehow this thing is, you know, all these platforms. Okay, I can't see it. Anyway, so here it is. What is the difference between cyber warfare and cyber crime? Cyber crimes are mostly to do with exploiting the backdoors and vulnerabilities of software and hardware, while cyber warfare is more to do with exploiting the front door. So you might not have heard of the concept of the front door because I made it up. Okay, when you think about software and hardware, there are always criminals trying to break through and trying to get into that domain to extract money, get your information, blackmail you, what have you. But what is about the front door? Front door is about, you know, popularizing your software, ensuring that a particular narrative is there so that your platforms are embedded into other nations. You get the whole information, okay, from the front door. You don't, only when you do not need to be in, when you are not in the front door, when you do not own the data, do you have to go in from the back door. So once I take you further ahead, this particular concept might I'll try and make it much more clearer to you. Okay, so how do I so I was just fiddling around with trying to find out how do I change the slide. Anyway, so history of the internet, most of you people out here, I think, have been born into an age where the internet was already there. You guys are so lucky. When I was young, there was no internet. If we had to find out something about any particular subject, we had to take a bus, land up in the British library or go to the public library, find out that particular book. And when you open the book, that particular thing which you want to do research on, the page is missing. Okay. That's how our world used to be. Because some smart aleck has, instead of borrowing the book and returning it, the smarter thing to do is tear the page and take it. Okay. But then you guys are lucky. You have the internet, connected computers. But when you look at the history of the internet and you go back into the late 1950s, the internet started off as a necessity. It was basically built for military purposes. What were those military purposes? If you try and research, they only say military purposes. They may not, explain to you what exactly was those military purposes. Although there are certain literature which brings out that it was also meant to connect computers during a nuclear strike. Okay, build a network which can always find a way around and communicate with each other. That's only part of the story. The truth of the internet is it was a corollary of the Vietnam War. Okay, where the Americans found out that they could not defeat the Vietnamese, and they realized it was all about population control. So the internet was built for controlling populations. That history has been slowly been covered up over the period of time. Although certain people have now started digging out that particular history, they've even made books on the history of the internet. Okay, and population control. How did they plan to control the population? That's a fascinating study by itself. So, 1982 was the first time when the word internet was used. Somewhere in 1997, I think, was the first time I saw the internet. Okay, and today, 2021, the whole world is on the internet. Our economy is supposedly by 2020 supposed to be 100% digital. We're still some distance away from it, but there is the internet. Okay, all connected computers. Um, I don't know why this. Okay. Technology. If you see, right from history, from the origin of history. History is a story of mankind. Okay, it is agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution, the electrical revolution, space age, atomic age, and today we are in the information age. In the information age, yeah. Can you hear me? I somehow got someone interrupting. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, you may.
Okay, great. So one thing which is very clear is 2020 to 2050 is a time when things are going to accelerate. Technology adoption is going to accelerate uh, much faster than what human society has been used to. Okay, are we prepared for it? Because when the internet was envisaged in the 1960s, the Westerners, once they understood the implications of internet, interconnected computers, they realized very early that if this thing needs to work, there has to be reduction in state sovereignty. Okay, they also realize, how do you protect the people? You have to teach them about the importance of privacy. Privacy is an alien concept to all societies. Okay, the entire history of mankind has been to have, oh, we should be open about ourselves. We should not have secrets within families. Okay, anyone who tries to hide himself is suspiciously viewed by society normally. But by the 1960s, when they foresaw what is going to happen, the Westerners realized we need to teach people the importance of privacy, and they introduced that into the education system. They also introduced certain narratives which said that this is cultural. That means when they taught the Westerners themselves, made their societies aware of privacy, they also taught the rest of the world that privacy is a cultural concept. What did that mean? Is it part of Indian culture? So if it's not part of Indian or African culture or some other country's culture, oh, it's not part of their culture. So two things they did. Okay, they ensured their population was aware of privacy and its importance. They also taught the world that privacy is a cultural concept. And when they created the internet today, the internet, is millions and millions of computers which are all connected together. So, and it is supposed to even survive a nuclear strike. But when people make something like this and they give it to the whole world, control was always would have been maintained in some ways. You will increasingly realize this internet is controlled by the DNS system, where there are 13 root zone servers. Okay, 10 of them are in the United States, two of them are in Europe, and one is in Japan. There are thousands of instances of this, that is copies of these root zone servers all over the world, including in India. But the control finally is with the original 13 root zone servers. And by that control, if people want to, they can just switch off the internet. Okay, so imagine that nations are transiting 100% of the economy into on the digital space, and the control lies somewhere else. There are, and it has been created by very interesting narratives, which I'll explore further. So, for me to try and make you understand how these concepts work in a military framework, let me try and explain to you what are commons, the global commons. The global commons are have been defined as areas that are not under the control of any parent state. My own slide, I am sorry, 1 second, let me try, and I don't know why I'm not able to, my slides are hidden. Oh shit, I can't do anything about it. Anyway, they've also been described as a fabric or connective tissue of the international system, which includes the sea, Antarctica, space, and cyberspace domains. The term commons was originally coined by an American admiral who lived about 100 years back, called Admiral Alfred Thayer Mahan. And he wrote this great book, The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, which is considered an all-time military classic. Not very popular outside military circles, but Admiral Thayer Mahan was revered during his time. And when he wrote that book, they say that every emperor, king, and president used to have a copy of his book next to his table. So what is this? What did basically Thayar Mahan do? Thayar Mahan studied the atlas and realized that Great Britain at that time was a global superpower. It had an empire which stretched across the globe, um, and there was India was a dominion. India's most of South Asia was a dominion of the UK. And Thayar Mahan realized that over a period of 200 years, the British Navy had dominated the globe by controlling the choke points. So, what are these choke points? Choke points are straits. Straits are places where the sea narrows, and the shipping lanes go through those narrowed straits, and all the shipping lanes, sea lanes of communication, they're called. Those shipping has to pass through those particular straits. If you control those straits, you can control the shipping of the world. And there you have, you see those numbers which I put, 17, 15.2, 3.8, etc. These are all 2014 figures when I wrote a paper called The Fallacy of the Cyber Commons. So that's something which I would recommend that your people should Google out, The Fallacy of the Cyber Commons, and read it. So there it is. It denotes the millions of barrels of oil which flows through those straits. And you will realize the Strait of Hormuz, because the Middle East oil originates from that, 17 million, and the Strait of Malacca are the two most important choke points of the world. If you control those two choke points, you can get the whole world on their knees, because the world works mostly on oil economy. Okay, and not only oil, trade. The entire trade points can be choked. Now, what is the strategic significance of this? To try and make you understand, these days you people must have heard of South China Sea and the big issues in South China Sea. That particular area, I've just highlighted China and the South China Sea. If you notice, the Malacca Strait is where almost 98% of, or 97%, I'm not so, of Chinese global trade passes through. Okay, China is a trading nation. The other small straits like Sunda, Lombok, etc., are all Australian ore, going to China and back, and some finished goods coming back to Australia. But the rest of the world's, China, a manufacturing nation, if whoever controls Malacca Strait can choke China. And that South China Sea, this was foreseen. This didn't happen by chance. Admiral Thayar Mahan foresaw this particular thing and said that when he looked at China from the 19th century and looked at the global map, he realized at that time the Chinese population was 400 million. And he said, this is a population which is today in the agricultural age. When they come into the industrial age and the Western science has spread into the society, they will become a superpower which will challenge the West, and we need to prepare for it. And he realized that for defending the United States, he says we have to plan in advance. He vociferously said that we need to go into the Pacific. They bought or took over islands in the Pacific, and they also created the first island chain by a careful plan of creating allies over there. Okay, Taiwan, Singapore, Malaysia, all these places, Philippines, all these places, Japan, all South Korea are all places which the US has carefully ensured the alliances with them to prevent the Chinese from breaking out and challenging the US. Okay, and what has the Chinese done? Okay, sorry, I go back. Can we go back? Yeah. So if you notice, today what the Chinese is doing, the CPEC, they are trying to break out of this, stranglehold which the Americans have on them by creating that road via POK and through Pakistan. They're also trying to create a road through Burma into the Bay of Bengal. They're also trying to create an overland trade route to Europe, all with an aim to break out of this Malacca Strait stranglehold. Okay, South China Sea. That's why it is so contentious. Now, Command of the Commons is the military foundation of US hegemony. We all realize that in 1947 was a year when, after the end of the Second World War, the British withdrew from India. Now, why did the British withdraw from India? There are multiple factors which played out there. But human nature in the last few millennia, since its time of the Homo sapien evolution in the last 200,000 to 300,000 years, has not changed. for the next few thousand years, it's unlikely to change. We remain what we are, the naked ape. And our, what we aspire for, what we would like to be, etc., are all, what happened, the way we were 100,000 years is how our mind works even today. We have not changed much. When the humans are competitive people, we create tribes, we create communities, we create societies, we create states, we create nations. We all compete. We keep creating. We are cooperative beings, but we also compete with each other. And today, the Westphalian system of the nation state is a basic common denominator. We can all say we are part of this nation state club. And as being part of the club, we play for the club and we compete against other clubs. Okay, that's how the human race is organized. When I look at it purely from a military point of view. Now, here is Barry Pawson, an MIT professor, who said that command of the key commons is the key enabler of US global power position. Okay, what does he mean by that? So in the olden days, if you are a superior military power, you used to invade nations, establish your governments out there, and extract wealth. That's what Great Britain did to us. Okay, they bought in via that MNC called East India Company. They came through trade. They slowly started getting into the local politics, and one by one they took over India. Then at one point, the Indian people rebelled. The state itself came to take it over, and they almost ruled us for about 200 odd years. By the time they left us, we were one of the richest countries in human history. We became one of the poorest countries. Okay, and we are now trying to recover ourselves. But what Barry Pawson is saying is, if you control the connective fabric areas where state sovereignty does not exist, that is the high seas, outer space, and areas which connect through which nations conduct trade, if you can control them, you can still control and influence nations. So if, for example, if Iran does not fully listen to the United States Treasury puts sanctions on Iran, the US Navy comes and establishes blockades, and Iran's economy slowly gets restricted, where they are said, if you want to grow, you have to listen to us. That's how they control. Imperialism is in new forms. Okay, people have even called it gunboat diplomacy. Now the narratives have changed, but like I said, human nature being what it is, this sort of imperial control even today continues. I will not go into the morality of whether it's good or bad, but I'm just pointing out a particular way nations behave. So a definition of commons: a space in the international system over which states do not exercise the normal prerogatives of sovereignty, and which norms provide for universal access for economic, political, scientific, cultural, and sometimes military purposes for those states with the requisite technological capabilities. So to make you understand the strategic significance of these different domains, the value of world trade as per 2014 figures was $18 trillion. Sea is 70% by value and 80% by volume. Air was 20% by value and 1% by volume, mostly smartphones and other digital things. And land, 10% by value and 19% by volume. Okay, and then came the cyberspace, an artificial construct. Let us try and explore it in the same fashion. In 2014, I took out this figure that transactions on SWIFT. Okay, that means interbank transactions, what, $10 trillion per day. That was in 2014. It has increased tremendously from that day. Okay, not only SWIFT, but cyberspace only about interbank transactions. And cyberspace, most of it is via these undersea cables. Only a very limited part of it is via space. Okay, satellites. But when you look at the strategic landscape of cyberspace, you will slowly realize modernity and cyberspace are totally intermingled with each other. You look at any sector, whether it's agriculture, food, public health, emergency services, government, defense industrial base, telecommunications, transportation, banking, finance, your stock markets, everything has got to do with cyberspace. And you can call it the nervous system of the globe. Now, it's evident as to why cyberspace has been described as strategic high ground of the 21st century, the domination of which is the prize pursued by global powers. And this explains, in 2016, to make the people in the military understand the significance of this, I said the US budget for cybersecurity, the US military budget for cybersecurity is larger than the nuclear weapons budget. And China saw it much before India. Okay. And post 2000, Snowden, they clearly declared that they have to, if they have to become a superpower or a global power, they have to concentrate on cyberspace and information warfare, the information domain. So the first to describe the existence of a commons in cyberspace was Arthur Zabriskie in 2004, when he headed the Pentagon transformation, system. He compared cyberspace commons to the commons of the 19th and 20th century, that this is going to be the most important strategic commons of the 21st century. Okay. He also noticed multiple, that since it was an artificial construct, it did not have the same, characteristics of traditional commons like the high seas or the air or space, etc. This had a total different. You had to understand this in a total different way. So, characteristics of cyberspace. Cyberspace can be broadly divided into a physical and information layer. Okay, information layer is a social construct. There are people who say it is 3 layers and there is a cognitive layer. I try to maintain it as at 2, because the cognitive layer you cannot fully capture. The literature doesn't exist to ensure where you can empirically capture this cognitive layer. So it's a human-made domain, subject to quick and constant reorganization and reconstruction. It's also venue for military activity. Barriers to entry are low. You take 100 years to create a navy, you take lesser time to create an air force, and much lesser time to create an army. Cyberspace, all of you guys, if I give you a smartphone or a laptop, you all can be relevant. There might be people who can create code, who might have brilliant ideas. Barriers to entry are very low. That is significant. Okay. In India, what has happened is we, as usual, we happened on into the information age and the cyber age by accident. Our software industry, we just got into it by accident. And one reason they felt that the software industry took off was there was no government control. But whether were they smart narratives created by intelligent people? Because if cyberspace had to expand the way it did, it could not have happened without people creating narratives to push it. But barely 20 years back, I used to hear, statements like the global village, the earth is flat. Okay. Oh, we are going to become sovereignty is going to break down and we are going to be on people. None of that has happened, but a lot of people did propagate that. That's how we stumbled onto this age. So in 2014, most of you might not be aware, the Modi 1 government, one of the first things which they passed was the free and open source initiative for Digital India. It failed. Make in India and Startup India, no one would call it a success. In 2013, post Snowden, the BRICS nations passed a resolution telling, let us create a new cyber, digital age. Let us build it on open source and India should take the lead. This was proposed by Brazil, Russia, and South Africa. China did not. But we failed to catch all those things. But today, okay, we have now said, okay, we need to concentrate on Atmanirbhar, which is a very good positive step. Okay, I don't know how we came back there. I don't know where we are. Okay, the next slide. Yeah. Today, when you look at India, we are heavily dependent on solutions by foreign nations and vulnerable from adversarial state-sponsored attacks. Because if the platform belongs to another nation, the whole control belongs to another nation. We do not have a privacy law. We have acceleratedly gone to the Digital India without even preparing ourselves with a privacy law. Now we have created Aadhaar. The whole Aadhaar platform has been on, created on platforms by foreign companies. What are the challenges? No ecosystem for promoting innovation. Although we are talking about it, still yet to take off. Why is that so? Because there are lobby groups in the form of industry bodies who are totally advocating MNC interests, because they are the ones who pay them bigger amounts than what Indians can put. We have not protected ourselves with adequately with adequate laws. The government of India has tried to redress this partially by bringing in preferential market access for Indian products. The privacy law is yet to come, and I am a guy who says that the privacy law has no meaning if the data is not under your control. There is no data localization, which is being totally opposed by huge amounts of literature and people who have been funded by the big, international multinationals who stand to lose out. How can you create a law without jurisdiction? So, what is the strategic deception which we were subject to? The internet in the information age can be divided into two: pre-Snowden, post-Snowden. Pre-Snowden, people like me used to say, hey, there are dangers that we used to be ignored. Snowden came out with the revelations, people like me proved to be correct. And the world took notice, and a lot of nations did course corrections. In India, that did not happen because our entrenched software industry, represented by NASSCOM, etc., they carried out such a, they said, oh, we have no alternative. And they poo-pooed a lot of things about, control of platforms being important. They kept on talking about people, process, and technology and stuff, a whole lot of narratives. Post-Snowden, in Europe, people noticed, they said our data should not go out. Yeah, I am also wondering why, who is drawing all this? I don't know from where that arrow also came in. In my screen also it's happening. Anyway, if you could stop that so that we don't get distracted. The data from Europe used to flow to this social media and other companies using a principle of safe harbor. This was challenged in the European High Court and was struck down. Overnight, the European, just to ensure that there is some fig leaf, the European bureaucracy brought in something called the Privacy Shield, which has also been struck down. Okay, they have got the GDPR. The data should not flow, but the power of those multinationals is so big that even today the data is flowing. Okay, but the Europeans realize the danger that if they have to protect themselves, we can't allow the data to flow. Post-Snowden, people have tried to create narratives say that freedom of speech and personal data have nothing in common. You should be allowed to freely speak, right? Okay, but your data should not be allowed to flow freely, because both of them are totally different. Any nation which can garner, any nation or organization which can garner and process the huge information flows of the cyberspace and protect their own information will always win, be it in any sphere of human, endeavors, diplomacy, trade, and even in the military sphere. Okay, that is cyber warfare. Cyber warfare has got very little to do with cyber crimes. So the direction is national security cannot be achieved by just defending the territorial integrity. That's what our armed forces are, looking at, have been tasked to look at. Increasingly, they have become aware, but they don't know what to do because everything is not under the armed forces. We are creating huge infrastructure. Our critical infrastructure, etc., all totally controlled by different ministries and different this. Government of India spends almost 57. In India spent in ICT is almost $57 billion. Okay, and all of it. In fact, the vast majority of it is for perpetuating these systems. That money is all being spent in mostly promoting or buying foreign products. And even in our critical infrastructure, can you beat it? We are buying Chinese products and putting it out there. You people in Mumbai should be aware that during the standoff, the power of Mumbai was switched off by China remotely. Okay, the state government did say it. Central government said it is not true. But then finally, people like us have brought the awareness, and we are today. China is in a position where they can switch off Mumbai's power. Okay, without a single shot being fired. It is not only Mumbai's power. Huawei controls the entire broadband of India. That's because the core systems of BSNL in the last 20 years has been taken over by Huawei. So where is your stock market? Where is everything? Where is your digital economy? They control it. So the global commons are presently dominated by the USA through military power and the US dollar. Russia, China, India, long-term strategic rivals. Is India an ally or a strategic rival? Now, the very size of India, okay, what are nations for? Like I said, they are clubs. We today have a per capita income of $2,000. China is at $10,000. Because of the size of the Chinese population, they are, if they continue to grow, they will become a larger economy than US. They're already a per capita wise larger. Not per capita wise, I mean, when you control exchange rates, etc., when you calculate it that way, they're larger. But in real dollar terms, they plan to become larger. So in India also, when we grow, and we become, because we are going to overtake China, if our income rates become higher, and under one political authority, you will challenge the global order. And that is why India will always remain, we are too large a nation. We will always remain a strategic rival. And we need to invest in indigenous technology to stay relevant, because if the others control those technological this and they control your data, they will not allow you to rise. India is such a diverse nation, divided by language, ethnicities, castes, what have you. We are highly susceptible to hybrid operations using the information domain. Data colonialism, people like me had written about it. People had, at that particular point of time, it was not a term which people accepted. But 2 years back, Yuval Noah Harari, acknowledged philosopher and thinker of the information age, he came on WF and said, when you have enough data, you don't need to send soldiers in order to control a country. Data giants in US and China could compile the entire medical personal history of politicians and officials. That's only one part. Okay, by blackmailing them, which is already happening. We have no clue. There are many other methods to influence populations than blackmail alone. So where is the data? We are aware of the cliche, data is a new oil. But data is much more than oil. Oil is a fungible this which reduces, you consume oil, it's finished. Data never, once you have it, it remains with you and you can always utilize it. Okay. So the data is basically largely in these three domains. That is social networks, operating systems, and cloud services. And the only two nations which are competing are the US and China. The rest of the world is irrelevant. They're not invested. The Europeans are now trying to do course corrections, but they're small nations. If you look at individual European nations, they are too small a nation unless they work as a European Union. But India, because of a population, can make a difference if we invest in these three things. Okay. The awareness is there in the government. They don't know how to go about doing it. They're also being led astray, let me say it, by a lot of powers which are interested in ensuring that India does not rise. I don't know why it goes up and why it, okay. So when I said social cohesion is a strategic threat for India, there is figures. We are the nation which shuts down, the democratic nation which shuts down the internet the most. The reason for those internet shutdowns are riots. And there are examples, the Koregaon, riots, etc. People sitting in the US boasted that, oh, we have done this using AI. The figures are very clear, which is the nation which is shutting down the internet maximum. So how can you become a 100% digital economy when you keep constantly shutting down your internet? To make you understand the significance, I've shown you the slide. 2006, this was the mix. If you see to the left side, was a mixture of companies, the largest companies by market capitalization. Mostly it was oil, okay, and banking, and even automobiles. Toyota Motors was there in 2006. Now 2019. Saudi Aramco was not there in 2006 when it came into put in the market. They became the largest, but more or less it's all technology companies. Okay, other than that Berkshire. But what is interesting to see is China has suddenly come there. Okay, by Alibaba and Tencent, and these technology companies, most of these old companies have got a lineage of 100 years. None of these technology companies are more than a couple of decades old. Look at the space at which that change has happened. And today, this is how it looks like. Apple has again overtaken Saudi Aramco. It's almost reached more than 2 trillion. Okay, I think the figures might not be up to date, but China, Tencent and Alibaba is there, relevant. Okay, we are not there. We don't have those companies. We don't have the laws or the strategy to reach there. You must have heard that a lot of our advice about where are we, when you look at yourself as 70 years, as an independent nation, and you look at the per capita income, which should be the denominator, because what is in it for? Nations are, like I said, competitive clubs, and we try to ensure that all citizens partake in it by rising economically. So per capita income is one denominator which we should be paying very close attention to. Now you will see there are two areas which are shown in red. One is sub-Saharan Africa, which everyone knows as is the poorest area in the world. They do not have access to oceans for carrying out trade. Plus, they were also taken over by colonial powers like us, exploited. So they have very poor indices. But there is India and South Asia. Okay, we might be slightly better than Africa. We might be slightly better than certain other nations in South Asia. We are also in the red. Okay, China has managed to come into the middle income. China used to be like us just about 20, 30 years back. 30 years back, I remember because I'm old enough, China was considered slightly behind us. Okay, India was ahead of China technologically. Today, no one says that. Now, I've taken a prognosis. Okay, that means PricewaterhouseCoopers, who is one of the big four, who is advising government on a lot of policies. There says in 2050, yes, India definitely will advance. From $2,000, we might come into $20,000 to $30,000. Okay, Pakistan will be behind us as per them, but the West and the rest of the world will still be ahead of us. Why are following their advice? Because that's the vision they have. We should be thinking of, like China, leapfrogging and competing with the whole world. We can't be following a path which is preordained for us, which will make sure that we'll always continue to lag behind. Then what sort of club are you?
So sir, we have less time. We have less time.
Okay. I'm just going to,
yeah, please.
Write it up. Yeah. The unspoken opportunity, I've just put it out there. Security of data. So people say, can India secure the data? It can only happen by laws and indigenous technology. And there is nothing called absolute security anywhere in the globe. Okay. It's a 57 billion per annum opportunity and is in consonance with the present government's Make in India and Startup India, Atmanirbhar. Now, I've just highlighted the fact that privacy is the most used word in big tech lobbying in the US. There are no figures in India, but they're spending a few tens of millions of dollars every year to lobby to ensure that privacy laws do not take off. The Indian figures are not available because we don't have the laws to bring them to book. Okay, that money is being spent and a lot of smart people are ensuring, and the narratives are being pushed in such a way that privacy laws do not come about in India. Since you people are publicly conscious and you're working with the MPs, please highlight this aspect to them. Take the message to them. Now, the period of the demographic dividend. India is a very young country. Okay. And when a country is young is when it can rapidly grow. History teaches us that. But we have delayed our growth basically because we did not foresee the future. And now we have come at a time where manufacturing might not take off because the world is going towards robotics. If you don't take off right now, this is the historically largest youth bulge in the human history, the Indian young population. Where are the jobs for them? If you do not give them jobs, there is bound to be social cohesion issues. And that is the biggest threat for India. Okay, recommendations, I've given it out here. We need to have a Lobbying Disclosure Act and we need to have a Foreign Agents Registration Act. Because of these two things, the narratives are pushed by people who are batting for foreign interests. Please go to your MPs, make them aware of it. So the rest of those points I've just left it out there for for you to this. One is, the last point is Strategic Venture Capital Fund. I've tried my best in the last 7 years to try and advise the government. You need to start it. Every nation, whether it be democratic or authoritarian, have got these funds. India does not have this because the government is afraid that they might be charged with corruption issues if they have a strategic fund which will provide back money to Indian startups. They only push it in public sector. It is the narrative which is being pushed here in India. We need to change that, otherwise we have no scope. Critical infrastructure, again, I have told you, we need to control it. And technologies like 5G, AI, nanotechnology, and quantum, that's the future. Okay, it can only happen. All of them is very closely related to ICT. Because the entry barriers are low, only private entrepreneurship will work. Public sector will not work here. The future is going to be now controlled by tech companies and the nations that control them. Okay, remember this during the information age. And I conclude by this particular thing. 60 years back, the Chinese were known for shoddy technologies. At the end of the Second World War, when the Japanese initially started making products, they were synonymous with shoddy technologies. No one talks about the same about Japan. 30 years back, China was known as the land of opium smokers. No one talks about China in that trade. We are better placed. India is better placed. Okay, we've got world-class talent. The only thing lacking is the strategy. We're still not in space. Governments in the information age should only make strategy and allow the entrepreneurs to drive economy. Okay, for that, what are the measures that need to be? I've written voluminously about it. Please follow that. Thank you. I've finished. Thank you. I try and stop sharing my screen, and I return you people to. How do I come back? Can you see me? Can you? Because somehow this thing is.
Akanksha,
Yes.
please go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you so much, sir, for such valuable words. You genuinely gave in a very different perspective about the topic. Now, I would like to hand over it to Kranti Sagar, sir. Thank you.
Sir, yeah. Sir, can we take one or two quick questions?
Yeah, sure. I'm all there for questions.
Yeah. So, Akanksha, do you have? Yeah. Here is one question by Abhinav Giridhar. It's my goal and aim I have set to myself to get into cybersecurity division of one of the wings of the Indian Armed Force. What are my options, sir?
First, this is you need to get into the taken into the military, which is not easy. You have to go through the process. You have to go through one clear a UPSC examination and become part of it, and then hope like hell that you get into. So the better way would be the military is now thinking of co-opting civil society. It's still a work in progress. It's still not come about. So you can definitely try for a commission in the Indian Armed Forces. And maybe by that time, hopefully policies will be in place where people with talent, because today, second you get into bureaucracy, you might be talented in painting, but they'll send you for singing. That's bureaucracy. They don't look at the talent. Indian policy is not about talent. They only look at bureaucratic rules. So it's a tough call. We need to change. Maybe you need to work through your think tank and make your MPs aware of the need for this change. Maybe that might be a better way to ensure change happens.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. So now we have a second speaker for today's session. The name of speaker is Mr. Bal Singh Khandu Singh Kamal Rajput. Welcome to you, sir.
Yeah.
Dr. Bal Singh Rajput, he is a MTech and PhD person. He is serving police officer in Maharashtra State Police. He is a good speaker and researcher. He has strategic and technical expertise in the field of cyber security. He has first-hand experience of building 51 cyber labs and 43 cyber police stations for cyber crime investigation in Maharashtra State. He has led the implementation of atomic multimodal biometric identification system projects. He is a key member of Team Maharashtra Cybersecurity Project for the development of an integrated cybersecurity environment for the state through Maharashtra Computer Emergency Response Team, predictive policing solutions, and setting the Center of Excellence in Cybersecurity. He was the part of cybersecurity delegation in India to Israel in 2016, Estonia in 2019. He is a team lead of Maharashtra Cyber Digital Crime Unit to develop the anti-piracy solution, which won the IP Champion Award of the USA Chamber of the Commerce. He is a Chivni Cyber Security Fellow 2017 of UK and International Visiting Leadership Program Fellow of the USA for Cybersecurity in 2019. He has worked in the economic offense wing of Mumbai Police and investigated many sensitive cases. He has experience leading team in large and complex police security arrangements for big events. He has led anti-extremist Naxal operations from front in Gadchiroli district. He has worked in communal riots sensitive area and stabilize communal harmony with his citizen-friendly community policing initiatives. As a police officer, he has expertise and experience in maintaining law and order, ensure prevention and detection of crime, and investigate and supervise serious cybercrime and economic offenses. He was a state nodal officer for social media analysis unit of Election Commission for Maharashtra. He has led capacity building efforts for cybersecurity, cybercrime, investigation for Maharashtra Police through long-term training program. He is working on prevention online exploitation, children, women in cyberspace through initiative like Operation Blackface and CyberSafe Women Campaign. So I welcome you, sir.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me. I will first share my screen and then I will start.
Yes.
So the topic today. Good morning to all of you. Hope I'm audible to all and visible. I think so. I'm not visible.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Screen is visible.
Yeah. So I'll make myself visible too.
Yeah.
Hope
Great.
I'm visible. So today's topic that is tackling cyber warfare, a need of the hour to secure India's massively growing technology ecosystem. So the topic is too big and there are many other aspects that need to be dealt. 30 minutes is not the right time to deal with the topic. The Pavitran Rajan sir has given a very good lecture. He has given more focus on cyber warfare and how the superpowers in cyber are trying to control the data, trying to control the networks, trying to control the narratives that are in the general public, and how they control the overall commerce, business, industry, and the the global commons, strategic global commons that need to be controlled to be a superpower. That was a fantastic lecture. One part that he also teased was colonialism, particularly data colonialism, and that is very much important from crime point of view also. My entire lecture will be not more focused about cyber warfare, but it will be more focused about, we can say, cyber crime. And I will not also focus more on different kind of cyber crimes, but I have make it very pointed to cover only 5 cyber crimes that need to be focused, because it's very important, because uh, there are many terminologies, many different kind of crimes that are happening. People normally get confused what to do. The attempt here is not to confuse you. Attempt here is not to scare and threaten you. Attempt here is to build a confidence that a common man, suppose a student is there studying in a technology institute, we need to encourage him. We need to give him a confidence that, okay, this digital world, if you try to start an entrepreneurship, you need to look into this aspect only and don't get scared, because the general feeling is that when you do a digital transaction, that you may get duped, and people are, reluctant to do the digital transactions because there is a negative environment around it. If you want to start a digital technology company, there is a negative environment that you may get data breach. Your business model, will entirely stolen. Your IP will be stolen. We need to come out of that. We need to give a confidence. We need to give that a kind of a right perspective that, okay, there are dangers, but there are more, a good future in the cyberspace. That is why I have covered the crime part, and in the crime part only, I have tried to uh, put a very short, crispy, and only 5 pointers that you need to keep in mind. Before going into what cybercrime is and how that is being committed, uh, the earlier speaker also have covered what is the cyberspace, and that we need to look into it. One is a physical layer where we are living. Another, that is the real layer. That is the reality, the physical layer. Then comes the network. Network is interconnections. You all know, you are technical students, and most of the people that I was told that they know some, bit about the cyber. And once the machines are networked, they are exchanging the information. So information is there already in a physical world. That information, how is being shared through personas. Personas are nothing but the IDs that we create of ourselves in the virtual world. So virtual world start the moment you have applications and you create the virtual IDs, maybe a Gmail, maybe a social media account, maybe a, your WhatsApp number, your mobile number. These are all personas that represent you in the virtual world. And then the actual peoples who have their thousands of personas. One person may have 100 different personas in a digital world. So you have many email IDs, many social media accounts. You can create such kind of innumerable accounts. And these personas, when they interact in the virtual world, it becomes a social, uh, we can say, um, common in a digital world. That is a cognitive reality in digital world. So if you see the social media networks, we are through suppose Zoom are talking to a audience of near about 200 people. It's in this social layer. So we have created a physical layer into a virtual layer, which is a social. We can interact, see each other, and share our thoughts. So this is how the cyberspace acts. Now, why I am here to explain the cyberspace in this manner is to explain you where actually the crime happens. Crime actually is committed by the layer first, where the people are there. So these peoples particularly target two things: information and personas. These two things are targeted, and third one is network. So here the crime happens. People are targeting networks, information, and personas. Personas is an identity theft. Means your identity is stolen. That means your user ID, your passwords, whatever your bank user ID, passwords, whatever you tell these are the personas are stolen. Second, information is stolen. Information means a data. What your data? Maybe data about your institutions, your company, your IP, what your data that is stolen. Third is a network. Network means it's breached, may be breached to stop the traffic, may be breached to stole the data, may be breached to harvest the credentials. whatever may be the reason. The actual, no, here are the three layers in which most of the crime happens in digital world. So once you understand the cyberspace and where actually the crimes are being happened and which layers are very important for us to basically prevent it or maybe take proper precautions, then we need to understand what are the different terminologies, because the topic here is given tackling the cyber war. Then there is cyber crime also. Sometimes people get to know that such an attack happened, and there are so many incidences. You see, we have to segregate the cyber incidents. Any penetration into your network, your applications, any manipulation with your data, any such kind of incidents is a cyber incidents. Every cyber incidents may not be a crime, may not be a war, or may not be an attack. It's just incidents. That incidents may happen inadvertently or maybe intentionally or unintentionally. So all intentional cyber breaches, cyber, we can say, penetrations or exploiting that vulnerabilities are cyber incidences. Every incidence is not a crime, not a war, not an attack. But if that particular penetration into your network or your application or maybe into your database, if it is with the intention to commit a crime or maybe a war, then we call it as a cyber attack. Then if the legal regime of the country says that it's a crime or it's illegal by law, then it is called cyber crime. If it is not, then we say only it is the incident because we don't have a legal measure for that. Till so far, I will explain, there are many data breaches. Apart from registering a data theft case, we don't have any other option because there is no legal framework available for data breaches to punish the companies, to ask the companies to have a more robust data protection frameworks, because there is no legal there, three maybe a cyber. It's a larger concept. It is so a crime you may sometimes see there is a only petty crime, but that may be a start to a cyber warfare. So we have to understand that cyber warfare is a greater concept. It happens with a larger picture. So any attack, so the three parts which I have mentioned in this slide, the first three parts may be a part of a cyber war, because the warfare may start with choking. Suppose I will give an example how the war starts and the incidences which lead actually to a cyber war. There is one incident, we call it Stuxnet incident. So why this is very classic? There are two incidences I must note here. One is a Stuxnet and another is a Estonia attack. And then we will come down to the attacks that are happening to India. So Stuxnet is attack with a 6 payload kind of attack. I will explain that how it happened, but why it is important in that aspect, because all about 3 terms are related to war. Actually, you may not understand or you may not feel that the war is going on. So Stuxnet is designed by USA and Israel to destroy the Natanz nuclear facility in Iran. Iran was not listening to them, and there was another option was to bomb, otherwise to destroy. What USA chose is a cyber war. They created a code, and the code was of 6 layers. First, it was finding the geographical locations. It was set open in the internet, and if it was into that particular geolocation of Iran, then it will remain. Otherwise, self-kill. If that Natanz facility was using the Microsoft NT systems, if it is into that geographical location and using NT systems, then it will stay. Then it was using the how to pass the air gap, because such nuclear facilities always have a air gap system. No, most of the critical infrastructures have OT technologies, and operational technologies are not directly connected to internet. They have an air gap, and then they connect to, then they operate. So to pass that air gap, they found out which is the vendors that supply to it. Then they found out if that particular firm is using it, if that firm is using that particular PLC, because the PLCs were used for logical controls, are used in uh, uh, maintaining the speed of the centrifuges in a nuclear facility. So Siemens was using it. They targeted Siemens and their uh, suppliers in that particular geographical locations, and they sit on their machines. When they supplied that machines uh, to that nuclear facility, they jumped the air gap. And then the fifth payload was to find out the generators. If that particular NT systems is working or is being operated for maintaining the speed, RPM of the generators, then the code will be there, otherwise self-kill. The last payload was very simple, was to just increase the RPM from 5,400 to 10,000 in a simple manner. Just watch it and uh, first increase to 7,000, then 9,000 and 10,000, see the repercussions. And at a given point in time, as per the uh, program logic, it will just set above the 10,000 and 20,000, so that the generators will explode. Once the generators are exploded, it have oils that will explode, and the centrifuges are very delicate because the entire environment inside is radioactive environment. So you can't go, humans can't go, can't repeat, no, can't repair it or do anything else. You have to left it as it is. It's the attack, if you see, is more dangerous than actually bombing it. Another is Estonian government that was hacked in 2000, way back in 2008. Uh, how it happened? They they just, because Estonia being a small country in that time, Estonia had no robust cybersecurity framework. The Russian hackers, we can say state-sponsored hackers, entirely controlled most of the government website and the services that were provided by the Estonian governments. And that's the way most of the people were relying on that services, were got confused, because uh, the sites were no more operated by the Estonian government, but by the hackers. And the Estonian government still come to know that, okay, this has happened because entire control has shifted to the Russian backed state-sponsored groups. So this is how the cyber war or cyber attacks happens. And we, because initial indicators of compromise we may feel it is like a cyber crime, we may feel it is just an incident, but in a greater perspective, if it is designed for a war, it will be a cyber war kind of a thing. Here I have focused on 5 cyber attacks that every installation faces, and that must be looked into. Why I have chosen only 5 and cyber attacks is because I was told that the most of the audiences are students or the entrepreneurs, and who want to do want to start their startups, and they need to look that where they should, uh, particularly from security point of view. So if you are running a small time company or SME or MSME or maybe a startup, and or maybe you are planning to have started, these 5 particular attacks you need to look into. One is phishing. You may say, oh, this is the most common thing, but this is the most dangerous attack. If you see 100%, out of that, if so 100% cyber crimes or any incidences that are happening, in the world or even in India, most of the attacks are happening in this way. This is the most sought after modus operandi in cybercrime is phishing. 40% of the crimes in India related to cybercrime are happening through phishing. Phishing is very simple. It's just harvesting your credentials by any means. Harvesting your credential means username, passwords, and other personal information. Maybe through a phone call, maybe through an email, maybe through pretending be a something trustworthy entity like a bank or a company, and just getting it the credentials and then committing a crime. There are set gangs, particularly these three gangs are more no in the phishing to particularly target people in OTP frauds, the OLX, no, online shopping frauds, and then you have the ATM frauds, and then there are, these are the mainly committed frauds like through emails, through phone calls, through ATM OTP or maybe e-shopping, just like you do the purchase through OLX or maybe a sale through OLX or any other shopping company, and then you do a transaction through wallets. So wallet, e-shopping companies, banks, and their credit and debit cards are mainly targeted in phishing attacks. This why this is important to companies, because phishing is a basic stage in any cyber attack, because to send a malware to your company to suppose to um, commit a data breach or maybe to control your systems, how to penetrate into your networks. Phishing is half technical, half psychological, because it has to be dealt with the human angle uh, of the cyber systems, because you have technology, you have processes, and you have people. This is where the half the technology part and half the human can convey, they can technologies might not, it's not right led platform, but human emotions, weaknesses, stupidity, and allude, that is act more prominent. He particular the victim is the second important crime that particularly happens with the businesses, small time businesses, because this crime is very important for startups and companies who are dealing. They are not particularly digital companies, they are the conventional companies. They don't have that much expertise in
Excuse me, sir.
yeah,
Are you sharing your screen?
yeah,
It's
it's
not visible.
oh my god. I have shared my screen. It's not visible.
Just for the last 2 minutes.
Still, it is the same thing.
Yes, it's. Can you please stop sharing and share once again?
Okay.
Yes, it's visible now.
Okay. Yeah. So this is very important crime. Many companies have lost to the tune of crores to hundreds of crores in this particular crime. This is, we can call, a special attack of a phishing. We call it a spear phishing, because it's particularly targets few people in the company, their way, style of working, their style of writing emails, their email IDs, how they communicate to whom. So they draw a kind of architecture, how many times who talks to whom, and in which way they communicate for financial transactions. Once they know the entire architecture and the way they communicate to each other, then they drop an email with the same, is supposed to be the, suppose a CEO has an email ID, CEO at the rate XYZ company, they will just change the one alphabet, maybe C. E may not be a English E, but maybe a slightly small e kind of thing, or maybe Russian E kind of thing. So email, you may feel that the email is from the CEO, but it's not actually CEO. It is just a we can say is pretended to be a CEO email, and they know that how CEO writes, because the way our style and the important words in his writing, they pick up and then give an order to please transfer this much amount into this particular account of XYZ client, or that client address is same because they are the list of the clients. Suppose there are 10 clients, X is a ABC client. So ABC client have one bank and its account. They will keep the client same, only they will change the bank number, the account number of the bank. They will keep the bank also same. So generally the accountant or the CFO may not understand that, okay, there is a minor change, and they will ask, okay, transfer the money. And these things have happened because it is not a digital security company. They are conventional people just communicating on email and giving instructions to each other. So this business email compromise is major crime that has led many companies to lose amounts to the tones of crores. So that a startup, a small time company, a medium company with 50 to 100 employees must look into this particular aspect. Only way to prevent this crime is to make aware all the employees not to click the email which you feel is suspicious, or even though anything that is being told by the CEO or CFO, you need to cross check. You need to have the second channel. Just like in case of virtual, most of the virtual identities, we have two-factor authentication. It is a two-factor authentication. Have a word through a phone, or maybe through SMS or a WhatsApp, because this is the way we can prevent it. Otherwise, most of the times we rely. There is a classic case, no, you might have heard this email compromise, is that one famous journalist got an offer, okay, from the Harvard to be a professor. So this is a classic business email compromise, because they changed the no they made an email ID which was synonymous to Harvard University, and no, people get trapped into it. And many CEOs, CFOs, many people in companies get trapped in such kind of email compromises. This need to be looked into very seriously. Awareness of the employees, because most of the companies, small time companies or big companies, just consider technology as the most important asset, and likewise they plan everything. But here in cybercrime, one has to understand that employee is also equally important as the technology part is, because we most of the time we forget that the employees of our company is the most important asset of that company. We don't train them, we don't make them aware, we neglect them, and that is where the criminals strike. So awareing or sensitizing the employees is very important. Then the third one is a ransomware attack. You all of you might have heard on social media, on there is in news also, the ransomware is a big thing. And now the payments through cryptocurrencies has become a fad. People are just putting their money in cryptocurrencies because they see boom, but that boom is entirely artificial boom, because there are only few people who control that cryptocurrencies. It's opaque. No one knows that who controls it because it's encrypted, it's anonymity, encryption, and the way it operates. No one have actually control, but behind the no, that opacity, the few people control it. They just are raising the rates, and then one day, just like what happened to Ethereum, one day they get vanished and the people get duped. That is the different story. That is a fraud that is happening with the cryptocurrencies. That is something different. Here, what we are talking about is ransomware attack. Ransomware attack, the that there are encryption technologies. So if a small encryption program is sent through a email to your company and your employee clicks on that program, that executable file, that programs get activated and it encrypts your entire computer. It is a simple way, if you want to say, this is what the ransomware is. It comes through a email or maybe any other as a form of attachment to the email. It's that exe file which an employee should not open and click, but they just, you have a work pressure. Normally that such kind of emails comes at 5:36 and you are hurry and you just need to, while going to home, you have to click and see what is there, what orders are there, instructions are there to comply, because there is a habit, a psychological habit, that most of the bosses wake up at 4:30, okay, and they start giving instructions, okay, because the whole day they will not give. Normal, that is a psychology, and that psychology is being trapped in spear phishing also and ransomware also. You may got a mail at 4:45 and you have to leave at 6, so or you have to leave at 5, and such a work pressure insist or force the employees to click on such kind of emails. And that once you click that email, and it has not happened only with small time companies. Merck's, the PETA, basically affected MERCK, Merck's name company that operates in most of the ports all over the world. If you travel by any highway, you may see the containers named like that, because that is company's name. If you happen to JNPT, you will see so many containers named after this company, because this company controls 40% of the business. Particularly, it's a conglomerate. Their servers were hacked. How it is related to India? Because JNPT's one terminal is actually run by Merck's company, and their servers got encrypted. There were 17 servers in JNPT. All that 17 servers got encrypted because one employee clicked on the email. So this is not with the JNPT only, because why I gave an example of JNPT, because JNPT is one of the biggest port, controls 30 to 40% of the sea, we can say, sea traffic of India. Is a big company. The company which was actually affected was Merck's, that is a global conglomerate. Having all said that, all these things were happening in critical infrastructure, because if a war has to be started, what the opposite party or enemy bombs first is the aerodromes, the seaports, the highways, and the critical installations like electricities. They are bombed. And here the attack basically stopped the operations of a port like JNPT for 15 days. So it can stop the companies. So you know that there are other companies whose servers got encrypted and these companies are not able to work. I can't name many of the companies because it have connotations on their businesses also, but this is the most important attack that you need to see. And then people fall prey to paying the ransom in bitcoins in a hope that the attacker will give the decryption keys, but it don't happen. So here, never pay the ransom. First rule, always keep a backup what you have in a separate container or separate. You can get the clouds. You can get a container clouds where the clouds are not connected. Means if you go to a data center, they have a caged environments. They caged containers. Your data, you can see differences because network your or another method in most of the corporate is keeping the memory tapes, so that even though your database, your servers get hacked, or even though data get spoiled, you may recover from such kind of memory tapes or maybe physical disks. So this is a good practice, and sensitize your employees never to click under work pressure any email which will or which may be a potential uh, attack. So this is the fourth one, is data breach, or we can call it data theft or a data leak. Such incidences are, I think so, innumerable. The any no second day you listen, this company got breached, that company got breached. Yes, but it's not a simple thing, because now most of people have accounts, social media accounts, the uh, email and phone numbers that are linked to each other. First thing. Second, your user ID password most of the times for the bank is latched to most of the e-commerce and e-shopping, or maybe the internet service provider companies. Suppose a Domino's India data breach happens, it's not Domino's data breach. Domino's may lose some business, but what you will lose is that your credit debit card information, your your phone number, your password, and that can be independently used to commit different kind of crimes. It's not that only Air India data breach will expose that where you traveled. That is different thing. But it also gives what your mobile number used for booking, the user ID used for booking, the credit card used for booking, its password, everything that that company have as a data of a user that gets exposed, and that is being used for committing different kind of frauds. Particularly, you might have, you never shared your mobile number apart from banks to others, that this is my mobile number attached to my bank. But how the criminals get that number and tell you that, oh, you have a bank account and this number and this is your registered number? Because in such a kind of breaches, they get to know, okay, your this particular bank number is having this particular mobile number attached to it. So this is how the data breaches are to be looked into very seriously. Small time companies, normal conventional companies, or even and if your company is not breached, it doesn't mean that you are very secure and you have deployed all kind of security practices, and so you are not breached because your number is still not there. Next time you may be. It's not that. There is no company which has still not been breached. Google has breached, the Yahoo is breached, Microsoft is breached. No, you take the name of the company that is breached one or the other time. Facebook breached with 500 and some no some 550 million uh, uh, users, their data is breached, and that is available in the market. So you can see all the big time companies have lost their data. So here, if you are a startup, if you are a small time company, you are planning to start a company, this aspect of data protection, because most of the times once the data is out, then the privacy people, then the criminals all jump upon that. Your company have to follow some of the data privacy, data protection, just like GDPR or maybe India's data protection act. You have to follow country by country. Your digital business may be in a different countries, so you have to look into this aspect of data breach or data protection very seriously while you are planning to start a company or you have a company and it collects the data of the people. So you have to segregate the data into sensitive data, into a normal data, which and a trade data, which you can communicate or we can share with other companies. So this is important crime. In India, it is rampant. Why in India it is rampant? Because India is the world's data, we can say, lake. Out of 7 billion, the 1.5 billion people are in India. The rest 1.5 are in China. China is a protected, you can't get into China because they have the golden, we can say, VPN kind of thing. We call it is a just like a China wall. They have a a program, or we can kind of segregated network. So their network is entirely segregated through a wall. We call it every traffic through China goes to that particular VPN and then only lands in China. So that data is not available to the world. Then which data? Because Europe and America have very small data. To channelize or maybe to learn your AI to make your business product more user friendly, you require lots of data. And from where this data comes from the free services. So in India, if you tell somebody that XYZ social media suppose service is free, you can see that crores of people jumping on that. You just literally Indians literally pounce on any freebie. So if you see in India, all these companies, Facebook, Twitter, all these are data harvesting companies, and their major harvesting point is India. In world, India just provides data to every product to shape that product. So no product in world that has not been shaped by Indian data. So is difficult to find. So all these great products, because we are the the data lake for the world. And that is why if you are Indian company, if you are an Indian user, or if you are a company in India, you need to look into data breaches, because your data breach is being used for sharpening their products by many other companies. And the last one is corporate espionage. This is very important, because here your entire IP can be stolen. And incidences has happened because you have a startup, you have a great idea, you have your own code, but if the next day if all that is stolen and just name changed, and your clients are hijacked, clients are being solicited that they should have business with them, you are gone. Because that is what corporate espionage is. And small time companies, startups are being ruined in this espionage. What you have to do is to just watch them, see their codes, see their traffic, see their emails, and steal it. Entire, in world parlance, it is talk that China has stolen every IP, no, that is everywhere in the world. They have built their economy, their companies on stolen IPs, means intellectual property thing. So that is very important, because a business rival also do a corporate espionage. Suppose your company is a competing company to suppose XYZ. So suppose China has a company and India has a company. Both companies are suppose equivalent in their revenues and their turnover, and they are suppose trying to establish in third country, where they are competing with each other. The Chinese people or their company may try anyway to penetrate into your company and get the secret, get the IPs, so that your company will lose tenders, will lose in that competition. So that way, the business rivals particularly target the corporate espionage. These practices particularly harvest the information and use it in such a way so that your company get ruined, or may lose tenders, or may lose business. Many companies, suppose I will give an example. When in Mumbai only, a company CEO, how he used the espionage to form another company. Two people founded a company. they had a very good client base. After 2 years of success, the person who founded, uh, they had a small quarrel, and they decided to separate. What the CEO and that the both founders has done, out of that, one was a crooked. He had employed a different person as a third party, only to harvest the data of the company. So when he left the company, taking money from the other founder, he took all that client list and established a different company. So that third party, which has been paid by the founder to just do the espionage, collect the data, collect the client list, and found the another company. So this can happen with any company. The insiders, mostly the employees, also do the espionage. The outsider people do the espionage. Hacker groups are being given the contracts to do the espionage. So this can happen with any company, need to be looked into. So who are basically the cyber criminals? They basically do such kind of five important crimes are state sponsored groups. There are many hacker groups which are state sponsored. You may come across that there are many, just like Anonymous. So Anonymous is a state sponsored group. Then there are organized gangs. Organized gangs for, I will give an example that there was one bank, Cosmos Bank in Pune. There, they lost near about 94 crores. The gang which particularly duped the bank was an organized gang. They uh, they they are only targeting small time banks to collect that important data, create a synonymous switch of that bank, and uh, uh, and then transfer the money to the tune of crores. In such a countries where there is very less chance of getting information you about bank accounts, or sharing information is very difficult. Then third thing is hackers or criminals. These particularly hackers and criminals, they are very targeted towards money. Most of the times your wallets, just like Jamtara and these gangs, they are hackers, that we can they are criminals, just targeting or doing that part to get money. They are not after destroying your company, or maybe they just want that particular whatever their intention is to get money. Most of the hackers are after money. Very few are doing it to steal the code, or just to take to test their skills. Then there are nation states. You might feel that nation states are into cyber crimes. Yes, there are many nation states. They are protecting, or maybe helping the hackers or organized gangs to commit the cyber crimes. And then there are business rivals. These are the five we can say agents which are committing the crime. These are the tips, very simple, very given from the parlance of general people should follow. It's not that we are talking here that which particular softwares and which particular security framework is to be used, and which TTPs are basically techniques, tactics, and practices are being targeted. We are not going into great details. These are the simple things which a person should look into. Is a small time company should keep in mind is use antivirus software, firewalls, VPNs when where you are doing a transaction or an important business. Uninstall unnecessary softwares from your desktops, your company desktops, your mobile. If you are using your mobile for maybe financial transaction, or maybe for important chartings, or important, because in your mobile every app given a permission of, suppose, SMS, reading SMS call list to the media, then they can see entire thing what is there in that media, or maybe in SMS on call records. if your mobile application has given permission to 10 applications to see your contact list, they have your entire contact list, so they can do whatever they want to do if that company or that app is not an app by a big company or from an authenticated company. Open emails from trusted and verified sources only, because you should have, even though you are a student or you are a small time businessman, you should mark the email uh, usernames which are trusted, and always see into the header and footer of that particular email actually who has sent the email. Sometimes a name, there are two things: a username and a display name. Display name may be the same, but username may differ. So email ID's username may be a small change. So we have to see always a username, read it, you make it and check for any change, a small time change. A dot may also change everything. So that is important. May always maintain a backup, whatever may be for personal or individual, if you are, and even though you have a company, always make a backup. Check for security settings. If you are only a mobile handler, that time also you should always, once in a week, always check what security settings